Hello, my name's Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and today I'm going to be discussing the Puritans and who were the ancestors of our second president, John Adams. So I'm going to be discussing how some of the ancestors of of our founding fathers, of our framers, ended up in America. So I've been doing videos just discussing the history of England, and I discussed how there was the English Civil War in the 17th century from 1642, and ended in the 1649 with the trial and execution of King Charles I, who was convicted by parliamentarians, most of whom were Puritans. They convicted him of treason, murder, and of course, they had him beheaded. And so there was a brief period, it's called the interregnum, a brief period under Lord Protector Oliver Cromwell. That was his title. And, he was advised by a council of state which was led by a president of the Council of State, the first president of the English Council of State being John Bradshaw, who had actually also been the Lord President of the High Court of Justice that convicted um, uh, King Charles I. So, who were these Puritans? Well, the Puritans dominated the Parliament, the House of Commons at this time, in this era, and of course there was a you know the Puritans, what they basically wanted was they wanted to purify the Church of England. They wanted to remove Catholic like elements, purging it of their vestments, their a number of things. We all know the symbols, the symbolism of Catholicism, and so things like the holy orders, catechism, and all these things, that are relics of the Catholic Church. So the Puritans wanted this purified. They wanted to purge the Church of England of these things. And there was another group of Protestants. They're called the Presbyterians. The Presbyterians are not to be confused with the Puritans. So the Presbyterians, unlike the Puritans, the Presbyterians wanted they differed in terms of their adherence to the church hierarchy, right? So they wanted an elected body of elders, right? They wanted to elect elders from their various regions and local communities, which they called presbyteries, right? Presbyteries. So they wanted to elect elders, and these were would be the presbyters, and these elected elders would constitute a church hierarchy. So the Church of England, just like the Catholic Church, was very hierarchical, and it had bishops amongst them. The church, of course, in the medieval era, was very powerful. They were very powerful. They were very wealthy. Now, these bishops were invariably associated with the aristocracy, because I'd mentioned how, due to the laws of primogeniture, where the first son gets the titles, the lands, the rest, others have to find their way. Uh, uh, an alternative, which was a comfortable route apart from the celibacy vows, was to go into the church. The church was very wealthy. It gave a lot of power and status as well. The church still had power and status, so they were the bishops. In fact, the church bishops were represented in the House of Lords, just like the barons were. The barons and the aristocracy, they were represented in the House of Lords. And so, at the time of the Commonwealth, when they were trying King Charles I, one of the things that the House of Commons did was create a law, a bill, a law that abolished not just the monarchy, but also the House of Lords. So these bishops were, in fact, they were a lot. They were very powerful in the House of Lords. The church in the medieval era actually had their own armies as well. Many of us we've heard of the Knight Templars. They're very famous. Of course, they're part of Hollywood lore. The Knight Templars, people who watched Robin Hood when they were children, know of the Knight Templars. They normally were dressed in chainmail with a white garment, a white vest that had a red cross emblazoned on it, and those were the Knight Templars. They were actually soldier monks. They were soldier monks. They were monks. They were priests, but they engaged in warfare. They were soldiers. They took vows of poverty. They were amongst the most ferocious soldiers, and they believed they were fighting. They were in a war against evil, right? They were fighting not just evil men, but they fought wars against evil. So they were controlled by the Pope, by the Church. So yeah, so the church was very powerful. Eventually, they were abolished. They were tortured in France. The King of France would eventually torture them, and the Knight Templars came to an end because they actually established the roots of banking. Right? They were very. It turns out they controlled a lot of money. Right? Because one of the things that the Knight Templars did was they controlled the routes to Jerusalem. So the medieval Christians, the wealthy ones, they like to take the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, of course, in the Middle East, and of course there were those crusades, and so the Knight Templars, they were, in fact, it was one of the reasons why they started them was to guard the routes to Jerusalem, to journeys, so people weren't kidnapped by robbers. That was a problem. People So that people wouldn't be held to ransom and whatnot. So it was a problem in the medieval era. So yeah, so the church was significantly powerful, and so the Presbyterians wanted to continue that church hierarchy, but they would have elected elders as who were the representatives. Back then, the bishops were not elected. Again, they were members of the aristocratic uh, family and their wards and their favorites. So that was just how the church was back then. And the Church of England, of course, was under the king. The Church of England, but they retained Catholic practices, and so this was this was the main reason why the Puritans, Protestants came up, and they were fighting and tried to extirpate, eliminates all elements of Catholicism in England, because we most of us know why the Church of England, why England broke away from the Pope under Henry VIII, because he was marrying the numerous wives, and he kept trying to get a divorce, and the Pope would not sanction it, and so he broke off, and of course he was excommunicated, and he created the Church of England, which was really Catholic, but they were now under the King of England, and they were independent of Rome, because everyone was under the hierarchy of Rome. But now with the Church of England, England had its own church hierarchy. So the Presbyterians wanted, they wanted to a hierarchical church structure, networked hierarchical church structure, but they wanted elected elders as the heads, as the governing heads. So that was one of the main ways that they differed from the Puritans. But they did maintain strict Calvinist principles. John Calvin was one of those early reformers. He created some kind of Christian theological government was it in the area of that we know as Switzerland today. Don't quote me on that. I took church Reformation history a long time ago, so I'm just drawing from memory right now. In any event, so the Puritans, on the other hand, wanted to be separate from the Church of England. There was a group amongst them that wanted to be separate entirely from the Church of England. They wanted to eliminate Catholic-like practices. They wanted complete reform of the church. They wanted to purify the church, and they were very dour, very somber. They didn't like they wore drab clothes. They didn't, even though they were very hardworking and many of them were very wealthy, but they were very into education. The church was generally, clergy was generally into education, right? Education, they were very grounded in education. But the Calvinists really emphasized the study of Scripture and following Scripture. So they were separatists, and it was this group of uh, Puritans who wanted to separate from the Church of England and its corrupting influence. They ended up being pilgrims, right? So the idea was to travel to Holland, but they ended up going to Plymouth, the Plymouth colony in and landed from the Mayflower in 1620. The Plymouth colony, of course, is part of what became Massachusetts today. So that's how the ancestors of John Adams landed in Massachusetts. Why did they want to go to Holland? Let me quickly mention this. So Holland, it was called the Netherlands then. Holland was under Spain, and so they were, of course, Spain had been a very strong power. It was the strongest power in Europe at the time. Uh, Holland had been under their sovereignty, and so they were breaking away from Spain, and so they had what was called the Treaty of Utrecht in the Union of Utrecht, Treaty of the Union of Utrecht in 1579, so 1570s, in the 1570s anyway. And it was a de facto written constitution for a that laid the foundation for a Dutch republic. So America is not, the people who often say America had the first written constitution in the modern world. No, that's not correct. So Holland did have a written constitution. And so in 1588 they had established what was the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands. So those were some provinces in the Netherlands, in the Dutch area, and they were Protestants, right? They wanted to break away from. They were breaking away from the Catholic Spanish overlord, right? The Catholic Spanish sovereign. They were breaking away from them, and they established a Dutch republic, and they became successful. So that's where the Pilgrims were headed to, because they were Protestants as well, right? And they emphasized religious tolerance, Protestants. Um, Now, this Dutch Republic, even though they were a republic, eventually they were recognized by Spain in about 1648 as an independent republic in 1648 by Spain. But subsequently, I guess a reason, um, what something that distinguishes America, which is a continuing republic with the written constitution, is that the Dutch Republic, the Republic of the Seven United Netherlands, would be transformed in 1795 when it became the Batavian Republic under the French revolutionaries. And after that, in 1806, it became the Kingdom of Holland, which was under Napoleon Bonaparte's rule. His empire, his brother, he actually made his brother King of Holland. So I guess that's a reason why. Um, I mean, they didn't continue as a republic under their constitution. So that was where the Pilgrims were headed to, the British English Pilgrims, who were the Puritans. The Pilgrims were Puritans, right? So they were headed there, but they were separatists. They wanted to separate from the Church of England and establish their own colony. So, but it was around this time that the English king was giving charters, right, for settlements in the New World, and which is the Americas. Of course, the Jamestown colony had been established with the charter given by King James the First um, to the Virginia Company of London. So that's also so the Pilgrims had wanted to head to Holland. They didn't go to Holland. Then eventually they had wanted to settle in Holland. Then they wanted to come to Virginia. They wanted to go to the Virginia colony, but eventually they were diverted. They ended up going to Plymouth. Right? They ended up landing at Plymouth, Cape Cod in 1620. They got off the Mayflower, and so we know the rest of the history. So that's how the Pilgrims landed there, and so later on, so that's how the colonies started to be established. And of course they were, so there were those who had religious reasons, like the Pilgrims, who wanted to separate and establish their own colony. uh and but later on there are other economic reasons, right? England was the first nation to experience the Industrial Revolution in 1750. Historians, economists normally try and peg it to around then, in 1750. The Industrial Revolution created an explosion, right, of population, especially in the cities. The structure of Europe changed from feudalism into um, a nation with all these factories that were churning out products on a very large exponential scale, at a pace they had never known before, with machines, mechanization, and whatnot things going on. There was you know the rapid development of technology, and there was a boom. So England now needed to establish colonies. There was an explosion of population, and so there was a need to also push out people from England. So that's another reason why people were migrating, and so these were new. There were now new issues that the government, policymakers were dealing with in England. Now, apart from that, though, something very interesting occurred. Now, the 13th colony, Georgia, was actually started as a penal colony. A penal colony. Um, it's something Americans don't want to, talk about with the sanitized revisionist version of history. But Georgia was started as a penal colony. However, the caveat is, again, that's what the records say. We don't know if it's different. They like to, American scholars like to distinguish it from the penal colony of Australia, where there were hardened criminals that were sent there. So in the case of Georgia, however, the it was like a work release program where people who had been in debtors prison, yes, people who went to debtors jail back then. In fact, one of our founding fathers, Robert Morris, who's normally called the financier of the Revolutionary War, and he was from Pennsylvania, he ended up in debtors prison as well. So, and in England, it was a terrible situation. We know of Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens' father, went to debtors jail. And, this, of course, affected Charles Dickens, the great author himself. And he wrote about these conditions. So, a guy called James, he was a lieutenant general, and he was actually a member of parliament. His name was Lieutenant General James Oglethorpe. He was a member of parliament, and he started to investigate conditions of the prisons in England, which were exploding because of debtors' jail. So normally people think of people who are in prison uh, as criminals, right? Outcasts in societies. They shouldn't be in society. But good people who just, were unfortunate, had some little misfortune, and which led them to be bankrupt, ended up in debtors' jail. A huge portion of them in England. And so he particularly got interested when one of his friends, a guy called Robert Castell, died in in prison, in debtors jail. So he got interested and started investigating the conditions of prisons, and he saw that they were really barbaric. Of course, he started championing and advocating for the creation of a colony in America, and that became the 13th colony. So he organized a trusteeship, and he connected with another guy called Dr. Thomas Bray. Dr. Thomas Bray left some money, about £5,000. He did work on the propagation of the gospel. So again, you see, the gospel was very important. He did work on the propagation of the gospel and expansion of Christianity into new territories, new regions, new colonies. And so Dr. Thomas Bray left uh, his estate £5,000, and this was given to uh, to the trustee, the trustee of Georgia, right, which was created, and with James Oglethorpe, and so they got a royal chart. They got a charter from the king. King George II was the one who gave the charter to establish the colony. The objective was the purpose of founding the colony. The charter was to for economics, for philanthropy, right? Philanthropic reasons, economics, and defense. So Georgia was to be a buffer, some kind of a buffer, a barrier between English South Carolina and Florida, which was owned by Spain. So So those were the three main reasons for the establishment of the Georgia colony for philanthropy, economics, and of course defense. In terms of economics, they were to produce silkworms, engage in agriculture, producing silkworm, uh, and so they also wanted to introduce merchants and artisans into the area, but these were to be also the poor. They called it to create opportunity for the worthy poor, right? The worthy poor. So Georgia Colony was also to be some form of work release program, um, for people who had been in debtors prison, and to give them a second chance in a new colony in Georgia, to be able to work as farmers, merchants, and artisans, to be able to create a new life. So these were people who were being uh, transitioning from debtors prison, and starting it, given the opportunity to create a new life in America. So that's what the Georgia colony was created for. So it was a penal colony. And so people came, they had all sorts of reasons for coming into America, the early immigrants who came to America. So that was what the Georgia colony was created for. And uh, James Oglethorpe became its was governor. Eventually, the trustees wanted to introduce slavery in the 1750s, and so Oglethorpe was against this, and he resigned. He lived a pretty long life. He lived to be over 90 years old, but he was against the introduction of slavery, and of course, slavery was introduced, and even at that time, there was a lot of resentment amongst the colonists. The notion, knowing that it was sort of a penal colony. It was they were introducing people who had just left prison, right? It was, de- you know, a debt, even though it was mainly for debt, right? They had been incarcerated because of 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 debt, and so their charter, the trustees' charter, was now revoked, and it became a royal colony, a royal. Uh, it became the Royal Georgia, which came under the direct authority and control of the the King of England. And so we know this is one of the things that the founding fathers, particularly Thomas Jefferson, had gripes about. They criticized the king for introducing slavery and revoking charters, right? So they put the blame not at the trusteeship, but on the king, because eventually, Georgia now introduced slavery in the 1750s, and uh, it's now established a slaveholding colony in the form of the other southern states, taking the structure of the other southern states. And initially, it had been a mere a colony to help the poor and people in prison for debts, to give them an opportunity to work as farmers, as merchants, and artisans. And so this opportunity was now perverted with the introduction of slavery. So there are so many other reasons for the early colonists for coming to America, but it's in terms of the penal colony of the that was established with the creation of the 13th colony, that's Georgia. It is unfortunate that America today has expanded that carceral system. It's all over America now. It's a business profit making enterprise, and it's now the largest carceral system in the world. America has over 2 million people held under the carceral system today, and it's of course the majority, the numbers, disproportionately this impacts black people, black Americans. There are many innocent people uh, who end up under the carceral system because of racism. I'm a law-abiding American system, and I was wrongfully, jailed, locked up. I was jailed without a trial based on false accusations. Even though I'm a law-abiding citizen, I was in my home. Police came to my home without a warrant on false allegations in order to obstruct justice, and they used corrupt judges in the state of Maryland. So it's a very corrupt system. Today we see how it started as with the penal colony in Georgia, for debtors, for the transitioning of debtors from debtors prison. It's now expanded into a venal, uh, very corrupt, morally bankrupt carceral system. Of course, we need a prison system to put away hardened criminals, people who do terrible things. But now it's a profit making enterprise that's corrupting our legal system. It's corrupted our judges like Judge James Bonifant, Judge Bibi Berry. These are corrupt people. I'm an innocent man that should have nothing to do with the carceral system. I was locked up wrongfully for about 15 months, apart from being placed under house arrest. And they tried to coerce me, and they did all of this in order to obstruct justice because I reported fraud in the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. Well, they have a corrupt network, and this is America. It's supposed to be the you know it's supposed to be set the example for the rest of the world, the paradigm that the world follows. Now, what will third world countries say? I'm somebody who came originally from a third world country. I'm an American citizen now, and I'm seeing that America has a morally bankrupt carceral system. And, it has those who are supposed to be custodians of the law. They participate, they benefit financially uh, I'm an auditor, so I know I can understand how the money goes, the paper trail. This Judge James Bonifant is on the board of directors of Montgomery County Hospital, where I was wrongfully taken to. And these hospitals, all he has to do is he will say, well, somebody is incompetent to stand trial, and they'll take them to jail, spend time in jail, and they end up going to the hospital. The jail cells that sends them to the hospital. So they have this corrupt system in the state of Maryland. It's a morally bankrupt. This it's a state that has morally bankrupt officials and judges like Judge James Bonifant of Montgomery County. They have a corrupt state attorney, John McCarthy. They have very corrupt police leaders. The police officer that was there, the chief of police then, was Marcus Jones. There's a guy called Demarcus Coleman. He files a false police report. This is what they do. They file a false police report. They go and lock you up. They have doctors. They write all sorts of fraudulent things. And they just lock you up without a trial. America doesn't have a bill of attainder. It's illegal to have a bill of attainder. A bill of attainder is you're convicted without a trial, right? I haven't been convicted of anything. I haven't had a trial, but they're issuing defamatory statements, false statements, and this is what our officers of the law enforcement, are doing in the state of Maryland. It's astonishing. But anyway, it had its origins with the penal colony of the state of Georgia. What was supposed to start as a philanthropic ideal to give people from debtor's prison a new beginning, it became corrupted with the introduction of slavery, and we know how that went down. So things might start out well in America with ideal intentions, but they can get corrupted. But the issue is when they get corrupted, we have a participatory democracy. Proactive citizens should be able to stand up for justice and what is right, and make sure our society is clean, right? The Pilgrims who came here wanted a better, just society. Some people might refer to them as sanctimonious, but they had ideals to create a better society. They did go through to extremes in England with the regicide, because that was the work of Puritans. Oliver Cromwell, who became Lord Protector of England during the era of the Commonwealth of England, Ireland, and Scotland, he was a Puritan as well, just like the Pilgrims who came. The Pilgrims wanted to separate from the Church of England and create a new colony. So Oliver Cromwell, who participated in the regicide and abolished the House of Lords, he was a Puritan as well. And we could see America also wanted to do away with all those signs of inherited rank and aristocracy and things like that. But today we've created a new form of aristocracy, right? With the billionaires and today the richest man in the world, Elon Musk, has far more money than those kings in the past had, right? But we do a wink, wink. That we wink at it and do not acknowledge that we have a new aristocracy that's just as bad as the feudal system that existed in medieval England, right? That caused the Puritans to go to war, as parliamentarians against the royalists. What's important is to create opportunities for everybody, and that's what America started off as. They wanted to be able to create opportunities as we look at the Georgia colony, to create a second chance and opportunity for people to work hard and earn a decent living and make something of their lives, even though they had been formerly incarcerated. Although the reason they were incarcerated was for debt. So back then, if you owed money, you couldn't pay it off, you went to debtor's jail. So the colony in Georgia, that's what a lot of the colonists were incarcerated for. In any event, I think I've covered what I wanted to cover today regarding the differences between the Puritans and the Presbyterians, and talk about the establishment of the semi-penal colony of Georgia, what later became the state of Georgia. My name is Olurotimi Osha. I like talking about American presidents, and of course, America's history unfolds in that process. I also draw attention to color of law violations, pivoting on subornation of perjury and fraud on the courts, which I've been experiencing in the state of Maryland. I'm still detained. Even though, and this is what has kept me doing these videos. I've been doing these videos because I've been wrongfully detained by the state of Maryland. They filed false charges against me. The police who actually assaulted me lied that I assaulted them, but I haven't had a trial. They haven't provided any evidence of me assaulting them, and they haven't. So this is prosecutorial misconduct, because the prosecutor should never file those charges. They've tried to offer me pleas, ridiculous pleas, including that I should go back to Nigeria and not come back. That's ridiculous. The state of Maryland has no jurisdiction over immigration. Besides, I'm an American citizen. The state of Maryland cannot tell me where to live. So this is atrocious, and these illegal actions are only happening because I'm black. I'm Nigerian American, but I'm an American citizen. So, and it's astonishing how the media has ignored these abuses, because when abuses like this, in a civilized nation, citizens understand when abuses like this can happen to one person, it affects every other citizen. But the corrupt corporate media has ignored it, because maybe the people who are doing it, the culprits, the perpetrators, the abusers, the predators, are white people like them. I don't know. Or the initial abusers, started from white females who abused me in the workplace, and I reported them. The workplace that I'm talking about is the Department of Defense and the Department of the Navy. And of course, as we know how things go, you will always have those black marionettes who will support them, that they use, to perpetrate their malevolent actions. Just like the way slavery started in the first place. We have to remember it wasn't white people who went into the heart of Africa, the heart of the West African kingdoms to get the slaves. They just had to stay at the coast. They had the black kings kidnap other tribes, various tribes, and march them to the coast, to the slave ships, right? So the same thing, somebody I trusted, the Auditor General of the Navy, who came, ingratiated herself, made herself appear like she's my mentor, now offered me, to the state of Maryland to help the white bigots. They almost had me killed. I've written this extensively in EEOC complaints, so we get to see that EEOC, the DOD Inspector General's office, they're just rubber stamp figures for rogue commanders in the Department of Defense and Department of the Navy. In any event, I'll keep you posted. Thank you.